Well, so good morning to everybody for this second day of the sixth edition of the Supranational Democracy Dialogue. This year, the issue is shared values and global governance for peace and sustainable development. It's really a pleasure to be in this event, and I thanks again Susanna Cafaro for having organized this important international event. To reach the sixth edition is a very great result. So I hope that many other events will occur in next years, clearly. Today, the session, this second session, concerns global governance and democracy. And it's a pleasure to give the floor to Anthony Kefalas, which is the Vice Director of Democracy and Culture Foundation. He is a friend of the Supranational Democracy Dialogue, which helps in the organization and always supports the activities of us. Then, please, Anthony, the floor is yours.
And I'm in charge of designing the projects that the foundation is carrying out.
Anthony, sorry, just a moment, because there is a problem with the microphone. Unfortunately, this morning is quite, we need time, but I think, could you try now to speak? Anthony, you may try to speak. I think we saw...
Can I start again?
Perfect.
Okay, all right. Allow me a small correction. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Governors of the Democracy and Culture Foundation, and I'm in charge of designing the projects that the foundation is carrying out. I must warn the audience, so I thank the audience for being here and the organizers for inviting us. It's an honor for us to be with you. I must warn that I'm not a political scientist. I'm an economist by training, and my approach to politics inevitably comes through economics. In any case, our basic question today is how do we make democracy more resilient? And we at the foundation are trying to find the answers through a number of projects that we carry out with always a very large number of partners. And today I would like to prioritize two issues which I think can help us in making democracy more resilient. The one is citizen engagement, and the second is the question of business ethos. Now, the questions are really, how do we get citizens engaged, and how do we change the ethical foundations of 21st century business model, and in which direction? Now, those two things are very intertwined, as we shall see, so allow me a very short historical digression. Now, Athens gave the world a direct democracy. England, representative democracy. America, the Bill of Rights. France, the nation state. And except for Athens, who was the midwife, all were children of radical enlightenment, which broke more than 10 centuries of Christian hegemony in the world of study that had seen the triumph of faith over reason. Now, this is important because this was the first step. The second step came as a result of a change in social perceptions. At first, timidly in Holland, and then with dynamism in England, working for profit became socially acceptable. Please keep this in mind because it's important for the question of the business model. In other words, first came social dignity, and then the innovations followed. The Industrial Revolution exploded, gradually leading to imperialism, the first wave of globalization, great power rivalry, and eventually to two world wars. It is these events that still define us today because of our failure to understand them and learn from them. Now, after the Second World War, there was a period which I will call the period of the glorious 30. That was the 30 years, from 1944 to 75, which were defined by two characteristics, which I call the characteristics of atonement. In the political system, strong leaders yielded considerable executive power, and independent legislative and judicial bodies provided an effective system of checks and balances.
There is a problem with Anthony. We are not able to hear you and to see you.
Where did I stop?
Please, now it's working, apparently.
Did you hear me or not? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, now
Okay.
it's working.
Now it's working. Can you see my screen or not?
Not yet.
Screen, no. Just you.
Well, it doesn't seem that the share is working because I had my share on. My apologies for a moment. Let me see if I can. Well, I will leave it. Okay. Okay. So where did I stop? I was talking about the economic system, that there was a strong orientation towards creating long-term value, primarily through investments, while business leaders were willing to devote some of the profits to help governments fight the inherent excesses of capitalism. The result was that you had long-term profit-generating growth that also helped finance the welfare state, thus leading to a reduction of inequalities, improved social cohesion, and political stability. Now, these were what we call the glorious 30s. Now, change occurred in the economy first, and perhaps this is a professional deformation, but we really think that the economy was the one that defined political developments. The change really started in the late 1980s when business perceptions began to change radically. There was one factor and three theories that led to this change, and these are these are what define still today the situation we find ourselves in. The factor was inflation, and which led to fiscal laxity forcibly. The theories were first the Laffer curve theory, that lower taxes increase public revenue, The rational expectations theory, which looked at markets as perfect clearing mechanisms, and Friedman's theory that inflation is a monetary phenomenon and only a non-monetary phenomenon. So the rate of interest is the one and only tool that the economy should use in order to direct economic policy. The passing of this theory from the academic world to the political world came when two government leaders, Reagan and Thatcher, incorporated these theories into national economic decision making and thus legitimized it. Important thing for today, it is these theories that were really accepted also, embraced by the business community and adopted by them. So it is the business model that dialectically led to changes in the political landscape. Now, what is the new environment? You have, the objective was deregulation. From the 80s onwards, the objective was deregulation. So you needed a strong executive to implement it. Consequently, party discipline was enforced at the expense of independent legislative power. And representative democracy became prime ministerial democracy, accepting the notion that the state was part of the problem, not part of the solution. On the economic side, the critical event was the creation and gradual emergence of a global, unregulated financial system bent on the maximization of short-term profits at the expense of value creation. At the same time, you had the recognition of the social system and the rapid rise of inequalities. Now, that was my historical sort of overview. Let me come to what we think today is the part of the solution. I repeat, part of the solution. Now, we look at citizen engagement as the linchpin of democracy. With the rise of executive power at the expense of legislative power, the already tenuous connection between citizen and their representatives was essentially broken down. Churchill's famous dictum still holds today, so we need to find ways to mend representative democracy. Our suggestion is that deliberative democracy comes to the rescue by incorporating itself into the institutions of representative democracy. This can and should be done at both the social-political macro and the social-political micro level. At the macro level, the end aim is the creation of a fourth body of government. With the EU as a primary concern, we are proposing the permanent establishment of a People's Assembly of Europe. As a demonstration of proof, the Democracy and Culture Foundation, together with 16 other organizations, and in co-leadership with the European University Institute in Florence, is conducting a pilot in Athens from September 27th to September 29th, prior to the occurrence of the Athens Democracy Forum, and the results of the pilot will be presented at the forum. The project is called the Democratic Odyssey. Citizens from most of the 27 member states will debate two things. What should Europeans do to prepare for the next looming crisis? And second, what authority should the People's Assembly have and how should it exercise it? Now, it is the common knowledge that the Future of Europe conference suffered on two main counts: representation and reporting accuracy. We try to deal with this through two ways. The first is on representation through sortition, which is an ancient Greek Athenian tool, but still the best that we have. Accurately reporting, which is the second, and what it refers to is whether rapporteurs who are simply there listening to what he's saying can accurately report what the members are saying and what conclusions have been reached when you have something like 200 people or 300 people expressing their views. So there, what we're doing is we're using an AI-enhanced tool of deliberative democracy called Orbis. This is an algorithm which is LLM trained, and it is currently nearing completion, financed by a Horizon grant to a 10-member consortium, including our foundation that is building it. Now, this is what we provide as a first answer, as a pilot, as a proof to a citizen assembly and to the creation of a fourth body of government. And this is an idea that originated in our 4-year-old global project called Reimagining the Building Blocks of Democracy. Now, I talked about the micro level. At the micro level, again, based on our 4-year project, what we're proposing is, and remember, we're talking about citizen engagement here, that parliamentary committees that consider draft legislation should have attached to them a permanent citizens' assembly or panel, itself aided by a group of experts who should change at least twice over the election cycle, because you don't want the experts to become the ones determining what is happening. So you want the experts to be changing, not the panels, not the citizens. And parliamentarians will have to be obliged to consult with the Assembly and ask for its recommendations. If the recommendations are not accepted, then the parliamentarians will have to go to the public and explain in public what were the recommendations, and they should provide a full reasoning for their rejection. So to summarize, we don't believe this is a quick, we're talking about quick and obstacle-free paths to answering all the dangers that democracy is faced with. But when it comes to citizen engagement, we propose a fourth body of government that will gradually acquire power, become institutionalized into the EU system, and gradually move from a consultative basis to a determining basis on specific occasions that we will determine with this pilot in Athens in a few months. Now, at the micro level, and we think that this is something that can be easily applied to all parliamentary democracies, at the parliamentary level, at the draft level, when laws are being drafted by parliamentarians, citizens should have an institutionalized presence, which at the beginning, again, can be consultative, and later it can gradually become more obligatory. Now, let me turn now to the business model. Now, it may appear to many of you that because we're talking about business, it has nothing to do with democracy. Well, I'm sorry, but it is our position that what business is doing today has a lot to do with democracy, and I will explain this in greater detail in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Now, look at what is the situation today. Because we've had the adoption of the 3 theories that I mentioned before, the Laffer curve, the rational expectations theory, and the monetary approach to the design of economic policies, we've reached another stage, and we also had the development of a global and essentially unregulated financial system. According to figures, and I want to mention this, according to figures by none other than McKinsey, which you would not really consider as an enemy private enterprise, more than 1/3 of the total credit, of the total assets that are in the world today are outside the control of authorities. 1/3 of the total credit, of the total money that exists in the world today is beyond the control of anybody. We are talking about $500 billion. Now, what is the situation today in terms of the market? Business leaders have become slaves of market analysis. The financial system has acquired a life of its own because it has done what? And think of this for a minute. It has transferred its risks to the public sector under the theory of it is too big to fail. This is important because what is happening is every time there's a banking crisis, we all say, oh, well, we can't afford this to fail, so the governments rush in to save it. Essentially, the banking system is working, having transferred all the risks it has to the public. Okay. Basically, business is concerned with mergers and acquisitions, a lot of leveraged buyouts, which means that you break up companies and you sell them for a profit. The notion of full employment has been abandoned under the vague idea that we should have what is called a natural rate of unemployment. So you accept ethically that there is unemployment, that would accept unemployment in the region of anything between 4 and 6% of the economy, and that's ethical. Trade unions have lost members, bargaining power and influence, and most importantly, the governments have failed to deal with what we call externalities. In other words, all the benefits and the non-benefits that accrue in society. What is the situation today? We think we've got a competitive market. We don't. We've got a glorification of competition. That is true, but we have markets which are characterized by monopolies and oligopolies. As a result, and this is a fact, and it's been debated now, and it's coming, a lot of economists and governments are coming to realize this. In Europe, especially, productivity has been growing very slowly, and of course, we all know that globalization has led to deindustrialization. So, you know, we've reached a point where there's a huge rise in inequality, which is rapidly reversing all the gains that were made in a 30-year period to 75. And this is important, inequality has some dangerous bedfellows. Personal unhappiness, family breakdowns, financial hardship, the breakdown of social cohesion, and the rise of political extremism. Now, history demonstrates that the rise of political extremism, or what I would call populism on both the right and the left, represent a clear and present danger to liberal democracy. Indeed, the persistence of over the last half century threatens not only business purpose to invest, innovate, and create jobs, but more fundamentally, the functioning of democracy and its institutions, the acceptance of free democratic elections, the acceptance of the rule of law, the acceptance of human rights. Now, in order to address inequality in a necessary conjunctions with the related global challenges of accelerating climate change, rising migration, the recurrence of pandemics, the business community must adopt a new business model and implement it in a unique sense of purpose that will transcend all of its levels and influence all of its actions. Now, there are 4 main critical issues that we consider as conditions sine qua non for the adoption of a new business culture. Short-term profit maximization, which have prevailed for the last 35 years, should be replaced by long-term value maximization. Addressing the climate crisis without resorting to greenwashing should be the business community's second overall aim, also transcending all of its decisions and actions. The switch to long-term value creation and to addressing the climate crisis should thus be seen as factors constraining short-term profit maximization without imperiling long-term profit maximization. And the fourth thing, the entire company and its stakeholders should be committed to this aim, but also helping address the issue of the intergenerational gap. Now, this implies a mind shift, and we think that we should have reforms, specific reforms that will help go ahead. And I will conclude my intervention by referring to 5 main reforms that we are proposing, and these are very specific policy recommendations. The first is to deprioritize reporting on quarterly results and replacing them with semi-annual and eventually with annual ones. It's been a long time ago, but those of you who were born a little bit a while ago will remember that companies did not report results quarterly. They reported them annually. Now, reporting quarterly results, which was ostensibly done on the basis of transparency, eventually turns the focus of business and investors to short-term performance. If you extend the business horizon semi-annually and then annually, it will necessarily shift more on medium and long-term value creation for societies and business. While now, the aim is how to keep increasing share prices or how to prevent share prices from falling within a quarter. That has changed the entire outlook of business, and it has made business destroy value rather than create it. The second reform is to accelerate the merger of financial and non-financial results. The reasoning behind this is to merging the financial and non-financial results will further shift the attention to sustainable practices and outcomes and limit companies from greenwashing. Because this is what is happening. You don't integrate the financial with the non-financial results, so you are able very easily to hide the greenwashing that you are doing. And it is no coincidence that greenwashing is a major issue on the first page of none other than the Financial Times very, very often. Reform number 3, modernize management compensation by prioritizing medium and long-term key performance indicators and abandon short-term ones. When you set the performance indicators on a quarterly basis, well, immediately the outlook of management will turn to quarterly results. It will turn to what we're going to be doing in the short term. The answer is put long-term KPIs in order to force management adopt a long-term view. Otherwise, they will not get the compensation they want. Reform number 4, and this really refers to what I said before, that according to McKinsey, more than 1/3 of the total money circulating in the economy is outside control. Ensure that the Dodd-Frank Act adequately covers alternative investments such as venture capital, private equity, and hedge funds. They are not covered today, and the result is that you have trillions of dollars playing around every day in the swap markets, for example, and in the foreign exchange markets, and they're all completely outside control.
To the conclusion?
And I'm finishing now.
Could you go to the conclusion?
Now with reform number 5, which is that we should leverage again the principles of the Glass-Steagall Act to safeguard the banking system stability and increase consumer protection. This comes back to the fact that again, you've got huge unregulated markets, and the Chinese wall between commercial and investment banking have broken down completely. The Glass-Steagall Act was enacted during the Great Depression, and it did two things. It increased consumer and investment protection, and it avoided bank runs. Now, it was sidetracked till its complete repeal in
Anthony,
1999.
could you hear me?
The
Could you hear
result
me?
is that
So 1 minute,
it has
please.
really destroyed. Okay, what I'm concluding. We'll simply say that as far as we're concerned, and our approach may appear a little bit strange to some, we work on the following maxioms. First of all, we think that our concern is what is happening to the places where democracies are actually operating. It may appear selfish or self-centered, but I'm really not concerned, to be very, very obvious. I care about what is happening to democracy where I have democracy. In the places where I don't have democracy, I don't believe that democracy, we do not believe that democracy can be exported. So we've got to deal with the fire in our own house. This is what we have, and this is our primary concern, not the fires in other countries, which in the last analysis have never had democracy. They'll find their way, and we can help them find their way, but we cannot force democracy upon them. So let's safeguard democracy in our own place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anthony, for your brilliant speech. There will be many things to say about the problem of relationship between business model and economic policies, environmental policy, decision making. But I will leave now Susanna to organize the second speech.
Wolfgang. Presentation.
Now, this is the moment of Wolfgang Pape, European External Action Service, and the speech The speech is on omnilateralism for holistic global governance. Please.
Thank you very much indeed. And I mentioned already, thanking means thinking. If you look into the origin of the words in many languages, the word of thanking very often relates to thinking, even in German, dare I say. So I thank Susanna and the organizing team for inviting me here and the chance to talk to you and provoke you into a discussion which I call omnilateralism and interpopular democracy. So these words certainly are not familiar to you. I managed to get omnilateralism into Wikipedia for a definition, but nevertheless, the word interpopular is quite new. It just came up very recently, and I tried to put together the ideas of the need for bringing people together rather than only nations, which we see particular from our European experience here in the EU. Because I feel instead of narrow-minded, destructive so-called international rivalries, which is a fact now, people talking about new Cold War even. We have to move on and get some kind of global governance of the common good, really. And that's very important, the common good. National interests hardly reflect the common good. But this is only possible, what I call, with interpopular omnilateralism. So to clear up the situation, I have to explain first what we see in Europe as multi-level governance. Governance is playing out at all levels. From the very local, in any village, we have a sort of governance. There's a mayor, and there's a representation even often of the people, of the citizens of this place. And then we have the next level, which is the province. Here in Italy, you have these subdivisions as well. Most countries do have even in between some kind of interprovincial organizations. We all talk about the nation always. The word international is all over. Even supranational still relates to the nation. And I think we have to overcome that. The nation should be only one level of governance. It's really multi-level, the governance system. And it's not only because of mondialisation, as the French say, or globalization. We have seen, not only in the economy, we all are traveling here. I wouldn't ask you how many have been outside your nation recently, most of us coming from other nations. But the nation as a word already has to do with natos, or nata, sorry for the ladies, being born in a place. But how far is this place where you were born really your identity? And it's always this absolute understanding of the nation that hinders to find solutions for global or even regional problems. And we Europeans have the history of colonization. We imposed the idea of the nation onto the world. In very simple terms, we divided Africa, part of Southeast Asia, Latin America, by our military power in the past, because our military power colonized those parts of the world, and then they were divided up very artificially, without any respect to culture, whatever, into nations, because they wanted to be part of the United Nations. So I had to find some kind of identity with a nation. And they established their government according to our European imposed model of the nation. And I think this makes us European responsible to find something else beyond the nation. And Susanna in particular, with the idea of supranationality being discussed here today and yesterday and years before already, brings in the idea of supranationality already. I go a step further by saying we have to go beyond the nation in calling it interpopular, between people. And we try already at the regional level in Europe, as you know, to see the supranational as a way to find some kind of competences at a level beyond the nation. That means the nation give up part of their sovereignty, which is very delicate, and some nations still have problems with that, even within the EU. I myself was 30 years in the European Commission, representing it particularly outside, in Tokyo and in Washington, as a diplomat for the EU. And there I saw how difficult it is to overcome these borders of national sovereignty, of national identity. We have to see the nation as only one relative level in the global governance system. And this is very important in the long term, I feel. We have already certain steps in that direction. It's not only the EU, even ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is trying to relativize to a certain degree the nation. But they are all still intergovernmental, these organizations. African Union, similarly, looks very much at Europe, I wouldn't say as a model, but they can learn from our mistakes of integration. We have very recently had a summit again between the AU, the African Union, and the EU, for instance. And we see how differently they are developing and how difficult it is these nations to come together in Africa even, although they are very young compared to our European history since the Peace of Westphalia of 1648, where we created this border and sovereignty of the nations. So at regional level, we have already some kind of a stepping stone towards more global governance beyond the nation. But it's true, the EU is the only precedence in history that has this idea of supranationality, competences beyond the nation. There are certain things which only Brussels, dare I say, only the EU can do with other, we call them third countries. For instance, when I was in Japan negotiating bilateral FTAs, free trade agreements with Japan, it was the European Commission representing the whole of the now 27 member states. It's interesting, we call them member states. The idea of nation within the EU is already reduced to a state. Of course, in similarity with the United States of America, so the state is the lower level to the EU, not the nation anymore. This idea of overcoming or relativizing the nation brings me to the concept of what I call omnilateralism. Here we go beyond the so-called multilateral system, which only many nations involve. We want to bring in other factors than just the nation. And I just dare to mention to you a very conflictual issue like Gaza with the Israelis coming in, the war in Ukraine. Here we see still the idea of the national border being very conflictual. And I think these wars can be avoided if you see interpopular relationships instead of only international relationships. And that's the next step I want to do. But to explain the word omnilateralism a little bit more from its origin in Latin, omnibus or omnibus, everybody knows when he goes into the Airbus, for instance, a very European airplane, that is related to the word omnibus or omnibus originally, meaning for all and by all. That's the idea, not only multi, the many, but going beyond that, we have to include everybody. And this is as well my idea with interpopularity now. We go beyond the nation only as a sovereign identity. And this is the main conclusion I want to give here. But to explain that a little bit further, I want to explain as well the idea of the democracy. We can have very direct democracy at local level. Going back into history, you see the example of Athens is always brought up, the agora, because the demos, the people of Athens at the time, had very direct participation in their government. It was a kind of self-government, not only in the sense of democracy as we understand it now, that you had elections or so. They were really involved in the administration even of Athens. But on the other hand, of course, at that time, for instance, the ladies were not involved and other certain conditions for this citizenship was very clear. That is different, of course. We shouldn't take that as a model for our democracy. But the word democracy is derived from this idea of local, direct administration, direct rule by the people. And even in America now, there's still the slogan coming up again for the November elections as well. All politics is local, because it goes back to the local decision making. And that's very close to the people. This proximity makes it possible to have at local level very direct democracy. People know what it's all about. They don't need Facebook or whatever media, which nowadays unfortunately are certain monopolies, if not oligopolies, to give information to the people, to the citizen. This is not necessary. At the local level, you have direct information. You can decide yourself because you're concerned directly. If there should be a school next door to you, or a swimming pool, or a disco even, you are involved, you know what it's all about, and you can really grasp the information, which is completely different at global level. Climate change is very difficult to see by everybody unless you're really already affected by floods or dry periods and all that. This has to be translated into politics, this difference of proximity of the issues at local level and then the much more abstract and very often complicated issues at global level. You cannot have the same kind of democracy here. That's why I say, for instance, in a village, if you are outvoted, if you are in a minority, you can easily move to the other village next door. And the Friday for Future movement, for instance, used the idea of there is no planet B. If you are not with a majority at global level, if you are in a country which has no influence at all, like Taiwan, for instance, like the Palestinians, they are not represented as a nation in the United Nations. They have no influence there. They're not part of it. And this is a problem because we have at global level only national representation, which is decided by the United Nations majority who becomes a member of the United Nations, for instance. This is an issue. And when you are outvoted at global level in the United Nations among the 193 nations, you cannot move out. There's no chance. It's different from the village democracy. You cannot go to planet B, as Greta Thunberg clearly says. There is no planet B unless you have a rocket, like some people might try to go to Mars now sooner or later, but this is a private business problem. Not everybody can do that, unfortunately. Okay, yes. So you cannot move out of the planet. We are fixed here. So the first conclusion for me is global democracy needs consensus. That's very difficult to get. We know in the European Union, the Council, where the member states are represented, has its decision made to 80% by consensus. And I think this is very important. That's why we have, actually in my neighborhood where I live, there is a council building. We have marathon seatings. So during the nights, the representatives of the member states at highest level, even Macron and Scholz and all these political leaders, they sit through the nights there very often. And once in a while they send Hungarians Viktor Orban to the toilet when there is a consensus necessary, which recently made a kind of a scandal in democratic processes. The Prime Minister of Hungary was told to go to the toilet in order to get a consensus built, and he did so. So without Hungary, they had a consensus all of a sudden. So this idea of consensus building, which we already practice very much at European level, is even more necessary at global level. But how do we get this kind of high-level consensus building at global level? That's very difficult to do. We cannot do it by the basic principle, which we still feel one person, one vote. That's impossible, because it would be more or less tyranny by the majority. And I dare say the Asians, with more than 60% of population of the world, would have, of course, a majority on most of the issues, which not everybody would like, particularly, I guess, here in our context as Europeans. There might be some problems to see it that way. On top of it, we have, of course, a big issue of the monopolies of information, which is through the Facebook, GAFA, and even worse, the Chinese BATX. I have to hurry up, sorry. So my first conclusion is democracy needs different forms at each level, from local, national, regional, and global. We cannot have the same form of democracy here. The higher the stage of governance, the less direct democracy can be exercised. And I have some issues with the understanding of the democratic odyssey, which was just eloquently presented. I'm part of it myself. I'm active in this context. In Brussels, there have been various conferences as well, and I very much like to discuss with them on these issues coming up in September in Essence again. And I dare to put in here a little bit of critique of the systems of presidential elections, because one person as a president gets a direct vote for ruling the country, and this is very dangerous in my understanding, because parliamentary control is very limited in that case. This is the case even in France, to be honest, and I think Macron had seen some of these problems when he had to deal with the Gilets jaunes and other issues, where he kind of used executive orders like the President of the United States very often does. We will see, hopefully not. Trump might be a risk again in this context as well. But we have seen other presidents like Putin, Erdogan. They are all presidents which are empowered directly by the people. So this direct election at national level of a president, for me, is already a very delicate issue. And we might see even the issue coming up with, in a couple of years, Le Pen might be becoming president even in France within the EU. I have to hurry up a little bit. I don't have to explain supranationality. It's very obvious here in this context. So I can go through to the next slides here. Just to show you how much a nation can be a bottleneck of information is the issue of the pandemic, where there was already early on an email coming from Taiwan to the WHO in Geneva, alarming them that there were people coming from Wuhan by airplane to Taipei with this kind of fever they couldn't analyze. And if that had been accepted officially by the WHO, the World Health Organization in Geneva, this would have kind of brought the pandemic to an early stage and would have warned the world about the problem. But unfortunately, the email from Taipei was not accepted by the officials of the WHO, the UN organization, because Taiwan is not a nation, is not a member of the WHO. And that's one of the issues with a nation being the bottleneck, because if information goes through Beijing, as it did in the end, it was kind of, dare I say, a little bit whitewashed in the sense of the Chinese interest there. National interest had priority over the global interests here. It's similar, we are trying to use the multi-level system within the EU. There is a problem still. During the COVID, we had, instead of clusters of COVID infection, we had national borders to administer the COVID anti-measures in a way, and this was much more complicated than necessary. But nevertheless, we managed to have the vaccines bought by the EU for all member states together. So we managed to avoid, almost illegally, competition for the vaccines within EU member states. This is the success story of the COVID measures at the time, because this was somewhat under Article 35 discussed and still is at court even, that the EU officially with their shared competences in health issues didn't have really the competence to do so, but this in detail can be discussed later if interested. I mentioned as well here that in warfare we have the problem that the national level is not always the same level in Europe and in other parts of the world. I just mentioned very briefly that in Chinese, Japanese language, written language, the idea of the nation has no history at all. It was here again imposed, and it's a bad translation in my knowledge of the word nation. So the second conclusion is no nation now is absolutely sovereign, even not North Korea. And we need this understanding of governance acts at several levels, and the nation is only one of it. It has to be relativized and not absolute. Governance beyond the nation, I mentioned already, we have, at least with the EU, a kind of stepping stone to global governance, because we have already possibilities to act beyond the nation as such. There's a competence at the EU level. Global governance can be very simply divided into informal and formal. The Chinese BRICS now are very much up front. We have Group 7, of course, which is very Western. The G20 is a little bit wider, including developing countries as well. But the formal governance of globality is still the United Nations, with its organizations always based on the nation. And I see in the COP process, recently COP in Dubai, a first idea where non-state actors come into the decision shaping and, to a certain degree, decision making at global level. And this for me is some kind of a tendency which I want to bring into the idea of omnilateralism. Global democracy, as I said, is very difficult because we cannot exercise really one person, one vote worldwide. We need consensus building. But here's a problem at global level more than anywhere else is the dependence on certain monopoly companies which are giving us the information, the GAFA and the BATX, as I mentioned before. There is a massive move since the COP26 in Glasgow to have non-state actors involved. That's NGOs, particular sectors, of course, climate change. They have their expertise, which is very important. The 193 national diplomats deciding formally, they are generalists, and I was myself a diplomat. We cannot do really the expertise and bring in really the knowledge which is necessary. And there the NGOs in various sectors have their word to play, and that should be not only a voice, they should have a vote as well in omnilateralism. So I see that as a new trend. Even the Secretary General said we need the strategic thinking with a decision making by civil society. That is a trend. And there I add this idea of interpopular democracy, because even the United Nations in its own charter starts with the word "we the peoples," not "we the nations," "we the peoples." That is the origin of the main idea, bringing together the world in the United Nations. Unfortunately, even the name still is fixed on the nation. We should really see it more as interpopular, between peoples, among peoples. There should be the ruling global governance. And this is the idea with my conclusion now, that civil society has to be included. And I don't go into the details that for the moment, and there I refer as well to the previous speech, we are very much still in the Western understanding of governance, and the United Nations has to include much more the non-Western ideas and practices in the world. I just mentioned very briefly South Africa with a Reconciliation Commission. We could even think of Islamic banking as an example without interest, which would change our capitalism to a certain degree. But I mainly would focus on the Chinese understanding in Buddhism of cycles in nature, which should be as well put into the climate change discussion, because we are more and more aware of cyclic economic processes. And this cycle idea, I think, is very basic to our understanding of the world in economy terms as well. So my thing is now to have interpopular democracy with omnilateralism. And I would like to provoke you with these terms for a discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for your very involving speech, and I hope that we will be able to discuss with you and other panelists on this very interesting point, also to complete other points. Now I need to, please. Now, I would like to invite Maria Varaki. There's a problem with the computer. Well, so now the floor is for Maria Varaki of the King's College of London with a speech on digital peace and the war, moral and legal dilemmas. Please.
Thank you very much, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
There is an echo when we talk. I think, can we switch off the mics, maybe? Now? Can you hear me? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it was this one. Yeah, if there are the mics, please, because I can. Okay, I think now you can hear me well and there is no echo. So good morning, everyone from London. I would like to thank very much Susanna for this wonderful invitation, and I'm really, really sorry and sad that I'm not there with you. I really wanted to be there instead of being in grey and rainy London today. But unfortunately, due to some commitments here this week at the university, it was impossible for me to be with you. I'm also very sorry because I missed the discussions yesterday, which were, from what I understood, very, very fruitful, especially given this dialogue between academics but also civil society, which for us academics is very important and enlightening all the time. So today, for the next 15 minutes maximum, I would like to share with you some thoughts that I have started developing during this year. And it is based on my work. I'm based at the War Studies Department. I'm a lawyer. I'm a public international lawyer. However, I deal a lot with war and peace. I'm not going, as a disclaimer, to provide concepts and understandings of war and peace because I'm very sure that each of us have a very different understanding. However, I would like to problematize you, as the title of my presentation already reveals, about digital peace and war, moral and legal dilemmas. I realize I wrote peace with a small letter and I wrote war with a capital W, and that was not on purpose, although there is a work by Professor Andrew Clapham in Geneva where he writes a lot about war with W as capital W and not small w. Here also I would like to say that my current work is the result of a synthesis of different interests and themes I'm working. One of them is the idea of digitalization and its impact on international law. I have been part of an ERC project where I work on digital human rights and what does that mean? Whether, for example, we should have a new human right to judgment, to human judgment or not. So I still combine elements of law and ethics. But also in my work teaching international peace and security, I follow closely as much as I can the current developments we have before the UN. And I think it's very much related to what Susanna and all of you have been doing the last 2 days regarding our common agenda. I'm talking about the report that the Secretary General in 2021 produced after 75 years of the UN system. As a response to new challenges for humanity, especially after the so-called perma crisis, from one crisis to another one, whether we are talking about the financial crisis, to the refugee crisis, and they use quotation on the word crisis, to the COVID crisis. So he was asked to produce a report, and he produced the report, Our Common Agenda, in 2021, with a time framework for September 2024, where ideally the UN General Assembly is going to admit the so-called Pact for the Future, a type of a new social contract between nations or peoples, as the previous speaker touched upon. And the idea of the whole idea is that there will be a summit for the future where the head of states will agree about our common future, how we want our common future during the next couple of decades. So in this pact, there are some interesting, in this idea, the last 3 years, there are some interesting developments that I try to follow. One of them is the concept that has been, some of you touched upon that, of public good. What means public good? I was very intrigued about the global governance of the common good from the previous speaker, but also Antonio Gutierrez has established different high-level panels where they deal with the concept of multilateralism, with what it means, or the concept of digitalization. So he has proposed something I'm working on, the idea of a global digital compact that is going to leave no one behind. So he talks about free and sharing common digitals, but also the idea of identifying global public goods. And among those global public goods, in this initial report, we see that peace is considered to be a global public good, but also the digital commons. So in his report, he talks about, he encourages the international community to regain these digital commons as a global public good. And of course, after this initial report, the last years, we have a series of briefs, a series of policy papers where they identify particular issues, whether it's artificial intelligence, or is the Global Digital Compact, or is this new agenda for peace? What does this mean at the end of the day after 75 years, more than 75 years of the UN function? So having said, having mapping a little bit this broader framework, in my work, I try to combine elements from this whole phenomenon of digitalization and how this is related to peace and war. And finally, I try to question, challenge myself, some hypotheses that digitalization can be bad or good, claiming that it's a more nuanced exercise that actually triggers more questions than answers about the role of human beings, human judgment, and human discretion. Now, I want to give you two very, very brief examples before I do another point. When I talk about digital peace and war, we are all familiar with developments that, especially the last 2 years, due to the visibility of the particular conflicts in Ukraine and between Gaza and Israel, we talk a lot about new technologies. We talk about a lot about artificial intelligence. I'm not talking about cyber warfare. But it's quite interesting when we talk about war. It's not only the semi-autonomous weapons that we talk a lot that deal with fundamental issues of global governance, but also the emergence of artificial intelligence to generate military targets. This is something of particular interest and a particular focus, I would say, during the last 6 months in the war between Israel and Gaza. I don't have the place, I don't have the time, and it's not the place here to make a more nuanced analysis, but this is a phenomenon where we start questioning how far should digital war, the digitalization of war, and I'm not talking about the means and conduct of warfare, but I'm talking about these issues that deal with fundamental understandings of international humanitarian law, such as generating, as we say, military targets, and how far should we go in a particular environment of pressure, of anxiety, of stress, of existential, of an existential sentiment, and what are the limits there, legal limits, but also what are the moral limits of the people who decide to utilize these particular technologies in a particular very tight framework. So definitely the issue of digital war is not, I'm not here to tell you something new, but within the new particular conflicts, we have seen an acceleration of questions about mainly the future, the limits, and our responsibility as people who design, who decide, who give legal advice, and who, at the end of the day, decide about the future of human lives. Now, the other example I would like to highlight here from peace, and I'm saying peace and war, I'm not going even to talk about the differences or what I mean about that. It's for totally another conference, is what I found very interesting when I was teaching a course on mediation to law students, and the head of the UN unit, mediation unit in New York, while I was giving a lecture to my students, he mentioned a couple of years ago that actually we use a lot of technology, and we use a lot of artificial intelligence, and I was not surprised that they use artificial intelligence, but I started thinking, to what extent can a mediator be replaced at some stage from an algorithm, for example, or how far algorithms that are regulated, designed with some limited maybe or more data, how can they affect and influence the decisions of mediators, how they deal with a particular peace conflict. So it's not only of using technologies of open source intelligence or open source evidence about potential war crimes or crimes against humanity, but we see another use of digitalization where hypothetically in the future an algorithm can fully replace a mediator, a human being who needs to have particular traits and skills and participates in negotiation or mediations for peace agreements of peace resolution. So these are two examples, very, very extreme examples, I would say. From one side, we have an algorithm that generates military targets and clearly with limited human control due to pressure and speed. And from the other side, we have the concept of peace, the unit of mediators, where they use artificial intelligence due to several reasons to improve some decision making, but also they explore new approaches to decision making with regard to mediation. So you can understand that both examples raise issues of law, of legal regulation, but I would say primarily of ethics. These are moral challenges, and I'm saying that being a lawyer. And I'm a lawyer, though, who recognizes the limits of law. And this is something that we have to understand very much if we want to be a little bit more persuasive about what law can achieve, acknowledging its limit. So here I have my final point. And in my work, I tested and why? When do we need? It is indispensable to have a human being to make decisions that are related to human life, right? To life and death. I'm not here to mystify the rational human being, because we know that common sense, whatever that is far from common. And we all know that we act with biases. Cass Sustain has written recently his last book with David Kahneman on noise, on biases. So we are from rational human beings. However, there is a massive discourse about the importance of humanness in particular activities that may raise massive harm for human life. And one issue is the conduct of hostilities. It's like, what is a military target? And the other issue is how do you participate in a peace negotiation when you know that from decisions, the lives of thousands or even millions of people are at stake. So these are important decisions of very high risk for the harm of human life. Now, here I would like also to add something very, my final point, which I think it's the core of my work during the last years. That is a little bit related to the previous speaker. We all talk about global governance, right? We don't even talk about international law. It's fascinating. We talk about the law of global governance. Very few chairs in public international law remain, I would say, mainly in the traditional last bastions in continental Europe. But if you see other countries, it's all about global governance. But what is global governance, at the end of the day? I'm not here to define global governance, but I would like to penetrate this veil of the abstractness and go back to the people who make decisions. Okay, and to make decisions, the leaders, the military advisors, the military lawyers, the policymakers, the IT experts, all these people who make decisions. And there we can see clearly the limits of law, because you can have a code of ethics or a code of conduct, but still you can see extremely unreasonable or extremely immoral decisions taken in the name of other broad public goods, such as public order, for example. So having said that, I would like to raise a final question. I'm not here to advocate for the necessity of human judgment, although I believe that in some areas, I don't have a clear answer. It's something I try to analyze via my work on virtue ethics and Aristotelian ethics, that we need some particular traits, such as empathy, for example, or practical wisdom, as we say. On the other hand, I wonder to what extent the humanness in governance can actually make us more humane when we deal with those global challenges and new threats. Or there is something else, something about limits, something about something else that we totally miss. And how can we find this fine balance where we can use all this new technology, on the other hand, the value of human life remains at the very stake of our decisions. Thank you very much. I stop here. Thank you.
Very much, Maria, for a very brilliant speech, and I hope that we will have the time to discuss issues connected to your speech. But now it is the moment for the speech of Paolo Davide Fara of the West Virginia University and University of Pittsburgh. And its speech is about global environmental litigations with states and multinational companies. Please, Paolo.
Yes, thank you very much, Saverio, Professor Di Benedetto. Thank you very much, Susanna, for this invitation here at the Supranational Democracy Dialogue edition number 6. This is a great pleasure. I've been following these activities from afar for a number of years, and I was attracted in following this type of work, which sounded always very close to the type of and ways I'm looking to topics. And Maria just talked about global challenges. This is definitely an area I've been working and I've been quite interested for a while. And it's the framework and the lenses of my work. When I'm looking to China, and China has been mentioned for various times by Wolfgang, when I'm looking to climate change, when I'm looking to energy or to global stability and security. And also when I'm looking from various lenses on the connection between the environment and the business sector, when I'm looking at the connection between governments, states, and private entities. These are again a lens of the global challenges that I'm trying to look through this perspective that Susanna has been calling very interesting supranational democracy. I really look to this type of topics in this way, how countries can discuss, promote peace and stability, sustainability towards this dialogue, towards the international organization or fora that exist. Specifically for today's presentation, I was initially proposing to Susanna a topic on global environmental litigation with states and multinational companies, but I'm coming as one of the later speakers, and so I nourished my thinking and I was taking a lot of notes, so I'm going still to focus on this topic, but I also want to connect a little bit on a broader perspective also on ESG, which is indeed interconnected because looking into the environmental social governance and how companies are integrating this type of matters, and if they are not integrating, what could happen is that civil society, like environmental groups or community, might then decide to sue those companies or to sue the states for climate change for climate change litigations. So when I've been working on this type of topics on climate change litigations, initially in the past were a kind of special topic, not of lack of interest, but of in academia, but also in the practice, where things seemed and sounded as something very specific, very technical, very narrow for specialists. It sounded like that for someone who was working specifically on dispute resolution or for someone working specifically on climate change. Now, more and more, speaking with colleagues from other disciplines within the law field or even beyond the law field, in public policy or community development or governance, this sounds now to be a topic that everyone wants to be part of it. You are talking even in Italy with people in civil procedure, they are working on climate change litigation. People in commercial or business law, they are working in climate change in a different perspective, but including litigation. So climate change litigation are on the rise, and so people understand the importance that these type of topics and matter are having from a legal perspective, but also from a broader perspective. I am a professor of public policy and public administration in West Virginia University, and I'm a visiting professor of the University of Pittsburgh Law School. So I'm trying to combine, and my background, I have a PhD in international law, so I'm trying to combine these fields and the interconnection. And climate change litigation is an area where this is possible. In the broader picture of governance, if we think about the evolving role of judges that went from a negative attitude towards towards the climate change litigation towards a change of mindset, remind me also all the work that the European Union, lawyers and prosecutors and judges has done domestically in European member states to try to promote European law and the European Union. There is a book from Tommaso Pavone from University of Arizona writing about ghostwriters of European law, referring exactly to attorneys and lawyers and sometimes judges to try to promote these ideas, sending to these messages that what they were having in front of them couldn't be solved just by domestic law, but only by European law. Somehow, this is what is happening also in climate change litigation. So communities, civil societies are sending petition, are claims, I mean, in social media, in activism, and then in the courts as well with legal claims, a message to companies and states that now the time has come. The usual message, if not now, when? It's already old enough to say it's past. So these type of cases are on the rise for a while, and the objective, like for example, we can take the cases that Client Earth and other no-profit organization in Netherlands has been brought against Shell, in the United Kingdom, in Netherlands, to try to find a better fora and context and courts and judges that could promote and establish jurisprudence case law that then solidify again at global level. So here we are talking about supranational democracy dialogue. We are also talking about supranational dialogue among courts and judges and lawyers and activists that can promote this type of principles and ideas. So it's a kind of, and that's also the interesting perspective here on this fora, coming from the idea of Susanna 6 years ago. It's really to bring together people from no-profit organization, the business sector, the academia. This is the type of complementarity that I see in this type of climate change litigation cases. When I've been looking to this type of cases, most recently I published an article on climate change litigation and a comparison between the Urgenda case in Netherlands and the Uliana case in the United States. I was trying to look, this is an initial article, but there are actually others that I'm working on. That was initial article on assessing the decision and the cases specifically from a legal perspective, but also anticipating some of other arguments that I'm presenting briefly here and I'm trying to develop further, is who is behind these cases? Who are those people who have been pushing forwards? Like for the European law, the ghostwriter, the judges, the lawyers particularly. In these specific issues of climate change litigation, it's not only the lawyers, are the communities, are the groups, the no-profits, I'm not saying that in European Union law wasn't the case, but this is even more considering the critical situation for environmental risk and environment degradation and everything that we know coming from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and all the conferences. So there are groups that they are constantly pushing forwards this type of cases and activities. And talking with a colleague from Texas, a professor from Southern Texas University, who was very much involved with various administrations, coming back to Clinton administration, Obama administration, even more recently Biden administration. What was for his generation in the United States the activism for civil and political rights, their new fight for rights and for access to justice of this new generation of the youth, like Greta, and Greta is not even as young as the youngest one, are environmental rights, are the new civil rights movement for this generation. So it was mentioning that this in the perspective of how many stepping stones have been done in areas like of inclusion, diversity, but also access to rights and justice, electoral rights in the United States, and several other things that for us, maybe in Europe now and in US, still not completely are granted in Europe, are not fully granted in the US for certain perspective. And the environmental rights is an area, again, of growth that continue to grow. And if I think then to the bigger picture, again, if I was staying on the initial idea of this presentation, I would have analyzed carefully these cases. I will do it in a briefer way to try to have then enough time to look into other aspects that comes to the conversation we're having in this panel and nourishing the conversation. The Urgenda case was a success for the case itself, for the arguments that's been brought, for the decision that the Dutch court has taken. And the Urgenda filed this lawsuit against the Dutch government, asking the judge to force the states to increase its greenhouse gas emission targets. And the whole court of first instance rejected all these legal claims of Urgenda, and but recognized the existence of a duty to take measure to tackle the dangerous effects of climate change and in its torts law, and also forced the state to pursue a target of at least a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emission by 2020 from a 1990 basis. And then later on, this decision went before the Court of Appeal in The Hague, that rejected all the arguments made by the government and confirmed the Court of First Instance decision, stated that the state failed to take sufficient measure to combat climate change, but again using this time different legal grounds, found the measure as insufficient in according with Article 2 of the right to life and Article 8 of right to respect for private and family life of the ECHR. So which are the implications of this case? So the decision of the Court of Appeal represent a relief and push simultaneously for those seeking to make climate change claims on the basis of human rights violation. And we have been hearing about the recent cases involving the Swiss government and others. Again, different cases, different results, different understanding and reasonings of the court. But this type of balancing environment and human rights is coming more and more at the time in the past when I was talking with people in environmental law. You were understanding that they were looking to environmental law separated from human rights, and then speaking with experts in human rights, they were looking to human rights separated from environment, and sometimes these values or valuable positions conflict one with the other as well. So we can try to bring them together to try to petition for certain rights and claims, but at the same time there are also some situations in which they conflict with each other. So it's not business and environment or business and human rights. No, it's environment and human rights could conflict one with the other. But stay on the case. So this decision of the Court of Appeal brings this push simultaneously for those seeking to climate change claims on the basis of human rights violations, so positively. No authority has primacy over another one, as the importance is to achieve balance between all the authorities emanating from the Dutch government and the Dutch state. And the political consequences were unavoidable given that this case concerned individuals seeking protection against the case. What about the Juliana case in the United States? And I will have to go very quickly. So the case wasn't successful as it was for Urgenda case in Netherlands. And in a brief, because I've already received a paper that I have a very limited number of minutes, the lawsuit was not an ordinary one. The defendants used several means to attempt and block the trial, and was rejected in November 2016 to demand to dismiss the case filed by the defendant, but then it requested to continue the case to trial. And so made a decision that went against the wishes of the children. Again, it was presented at the Ninth Circuit decision. There was a Ninth Circuit court. And the court also stated that tackling these issues of severity, so the court acknowledged the severity of climate change and most importantly, the role of the government in causing this phenomenon. So even though in terms of procedural, they were not recognizing the claims and the wishes of the children, still acknowledged the severity of climate change and the role of the government in causing climate change. And the court also stated that tackling these issues, the climate change severity, can be either made by political branch or even by changing the political system through the citizen vote. Again, it was not a resolution for the court, but it was giving a message, clear message of the importance of these aspects, which were the implication of this case. So the real achievement of this case is the express acknowledgement by the court of the severity of climate change and the role of the government, which was mentioned multiple times in the decision. And the decision of the court to reflect the reluctance of domestic tribunals globally to fill these gaps that are left by legislative and executive authority using the concept of separation of power. But this also gave information and basis for future case, but did not directly tackle the protection of citizens against climate change as a constitutional right because it rejected the case. So those are the cases that I was analyzing, and now I think I have a couple of more minutes just to mention on a bullet point perspective that, in my opinion, these cases, including the the cases of Shell in the UK and Netherlands, which I can't cover because I don't have enough time, are very much the basis and the interconnection can be found with everything that is happening in the bigger picture. For example, with the EU due diligence that the European Parliament agreed with the EU Council on the business and human rights perspective and the ESG issues, because these type of matters are becoming, again, more and more impactful. I can't repeat what Wolfgang or the other colleagues have said, but when you look, for example, on a comparison on how ESG has developed and is developing in the US, and how this is happening in Europe, you see a tremendous role that the European Union can have in developing this type of principles that US can take as a model. And how is the connection? The connection is that some of those matters might be then becoming the basis of some future climate change litigation against multinational companies, first reasoning, but I can't enter into too many details. And the second reasoning is, again, even for the Paris Agreement, many of the principles coming from United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, even the following, comes from the experience of EU member states and EU law, mostly, but without the prior agreement between US and China in preparation to the Paris Agreement, we wouldn't have the Paris Agreement. So in that sense, we are talking about a multi-level roles. We are talking about principle and regulation that are developing by member states and by the European Union that has an impactful at global level, but at the same time we need a dialogue, supranational dialogue from other countries, because then if they don't agree with it, these principles are going then to be effective in Europe, but they're not going to be impactful globally. It means that the work we are doing in EU and the EU itself and the member states and the scholars of the member states are extremely important for pushing forward this dialogue. But then this dialogue needs to go even further at global level to be able to have consistency and support from other countries that those principles and those type of reasonings are actually valuable at global level. I would stop there saying that this happened in various aspects. COVID-19 was mentioned before about how this competition among EU countries. We can talk about this reasoning and why multinational companies, even pharmaceutical companies, are retaining their IP rights on vaccines or medicine where the public has paid for it. I will just bullet point that. How this has an impact, for example, as a COVID-19 diplomacy. The colleagues before were referring to Chinese BRICS and the G20 and the UN. I see, for example, a huge impact global level about Belt and Road Initiative of China. So this is something that Europe and US are already monitoring. Bringing China and the Belt and Road Initiative in the framework of global relations would bring, again, something. Is that going to happen? I'm not sure about it. Knowing whether the Belt and Road Initiative is environmental or sustainability towards human rights, again, is an issue. Let's take the example of Djibouti. So in a nutshell, remain 1 minute, what I think is that the work we need to do from a legal and policy perspective is kind of imagine what is going to happen. What is the scenario planning? What are the multiple futures? What are the game theories we can apply to this type of dialogue and governance to understand which are the actors, which are the players, which are the factors, which are the visions that can then be implemented from different perspectives, legally in courts and litigation, through communities, activism and involvement, through academia, research and engagement. That's the way I think this fora is already doing, and so I appreciate very much to be here discussing with all of you about this matter. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paolo. The question of global environmental litigation is a very big question, which goes beyond the question of climate change. It's more complex. But anyway, I now give the floor to Bledar Kurti, okay, of Albanian University, with a speech on security and democracy and shared values on global governance for peace and development. Please, Bledar.
Thank you. My presentation is the desktop there, so I'm making it. Sorry. Sit there. Okay. Buongiorno a tutti. I use every opportunity to speak Italian when I'm in Italy because I grew up loving Italy since I was 5. I learned the Italian language just from the television. And I understand 100%, but I speak maybe 60, 70% of Italian. So every time I come to Italy, I can't find the opportunity just to parlare italiano perché lo amo molto. Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you today about my long title of presentation, but don't worry about it. Just remember 2 words: security and democracy. But before I address you with my message today, let me first of all compliment Susanna and the great team, not for this great opportunity for us to share our insights and ideas, but I will add a personal remark. Every time, and I'm being honest about it, and frank and brave, every time I attend academic conferences, I realize that in most of those conferences, the people who talk about governments and policies and EU and democracy, if those people were the ones to lead the world today, I believe this, the world probably would be worse than it is now. Why? They think here and very short-sighted. There is no heart and there is no bird view to see the situation as a free man from the sky to see all the pieces of the puzzles. Why am I saying this? Because supranational democracy dialogue is a great opportunity, meeting people who are passionate about democracy, are passionate about change, and they are passionate with their ideas. So thank you very much, Susanna. This is a great opportunity. Now, my presentation, please. I'm sorry. I want to share with you because it's mostly on I talk, yet, Susanna, where can I find that? I'm sorry. Okay. While we find the presentation, sorry. What's been missing in every topic, every time we talk about politics and governance, is the human nature. I never hear that being emphasized enough. We are acting like human beings who are perfect, who are good, and we don't understand why things go wrong in the world. Human nature has proved that for the last 6,000 years of civilization or 3,500 years of recorded history, humans have fought wars. Why? It is in us. We fight. We kill each other, as the history tells us. We are no angels. We have, like the anecdote says, the grandfather and the grandson says, what's inside of me? Inside of me, son, grandson, we have 2 wolves, a good one and a bad one. They fight all the time together. And which one wins? The one you feed. So we are here to feed the good wolf in us. Our mission is to feed the goodness in us through democracy, through peace, through dialogue. Otherwise, the other wolf will win. Now, war is a constant, one of the constants of history. That's why I love poetry and arts, and that's why in Aeneida, Virgil says, there will be, erunt etiam altera bella, atque terum Troia Magnus Mateus Achilles. Okay, I hope I said it right. There will be other wars, and Achilles will be sent once again to Troy. And we thought the 20th century, the century of the modern science and inventions, killed 3 times from all the victims throughout the world history. That thesis of being modern, being emancipated and progress has fallen down because the 20th century produced the greatest wars of all time. Yes, there will be wars, but my message, because I see a lot of students and PhD new researchers, there will be wars. There will always be wars, like right now in Ukraine, in Gaza, and other conflicts that might arise. But there will always be knights for peace. There will always be missionaries for peace. There will be fighters for peace. And I encourage you to be those people. Will you be those people? There will always be war. Please wake up. You are not living in a bubble, in a nice dream. The war will continue. It will be tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. My message to you is, will you be those people? Will we be those people who will fight for peace? Okay. There have been failure to preserve peace. Here there was mentioned the United Nations and you. The United Nations, okay? There have been wars without respecting the UN resolutions, okay? 1999, I don't want to go into detail. There have been, despite the callings of the UN for peace, there have been vetoed by United States, for example, the ceasefire with Gaza and Israel, and so on. EU, among its member states, has got many differences with relation to Ukraine, and I'm not going to mention countries here, okay? All these appeals, and we have here, calls for immediate ceasefire to end suffering. Am I too loud? In my head, okay. That means I'm enlightened. The Security Council has failed many times. The European Union has not been in harmony with the United States where they should have been, and Gaza and Israeli right now. And then when it was reached an agreement, it led to nowhere. The resolution of ceasefire with agreement of EU and United States resulted the very next day with casualties in Israel. But I'm sorry about the title you are seeing there. I will explain. Why we are in such a state? Because the world leaders and world organizations have been focusing on the principle of security. Security, security, security. Let's do everything to preserve peace, and as long as we are safe, we are good. But no, democracy is the key. Democracy and security must go hand in hand, because what most of politicians don't understand is that democracy is not the cure. Have you heard that democracy cures everything? Democracy is not the cure, my friends. I learned this concept from working in the government. I don't know why, but I ended up advisor to the Minister of Health, and then I had to learn about health, a lot of things. And all the doctors told me that there is no cure We don't cure, we prevent. Medicine is for prevention. If you are sick today, that means 10 years ago something went wrong in your body, has stayed with you 10 years ago. So democracy shouldn't be the cure. Right now in Ukraine, we are calling, okay, security, let's support Ukraine, but yet we want democracy. No, it should have been done 10 years ago to prevent that conflict. And the same with Gaza. I will explain that because of only security and immediate reaction to certain crises, we have, it's shameful to say, 6 ministers and deputy ministers in Ukraine and Minister of Agriculture arrested for corruption in the middle of the war, when people are dying there, the ordinary people are dying, and certain politicians are thinking of corruption. I can't think of de Gaulle and Churchill and Roosevelt. You know, they had all the opportunity to become billionaires in their time. They didn't do it. Why? They were statesmen. They came from democratic countries. But human nature, there is a positive thing that human nature does to the world conflicts. It's not predictable. Putin thought it will divide Europe through invasion of Ukraine. No, it united Europe. It strengthened NATO. All the Western countries allied together in one cause, defending of Ukraine and so on. But still, what's going to happen tomorrow? What if the war ends today in Ukraine? Will Ukraine and other aspiring countries for EU and NATO and so on, are they ready? Are they democratic? That's why we should support their security as well as democracy. In the case of Gaza, I'm sure most of the world was shocked on October 7, right, 2023. But I wasn't. I was following the crisis in Israel, the internal conflicts. They were risking a civil war since January 2023, then March, then July. And the Israeli president even said, I'm so shocked, Israelis threatening to kill each other and the country is so divided. It was the blink of civil war in Israel because of corruption, because of judicial reforms that were happening there. So prior to October 7, there was a big problem in Israel, a democratic country, risking the collapse of democracy. So if we are not vigilant for democracy, believe you me, security will always be threatened. Yesterday Claudia came to and asked us, what do you want the European Union, members of parliament to address something. Please, if one day you become European members of parliament or officials, please address corruption. Please. I come from a country that we celebrate every year. We get drunk every year. Because this year we are joining EU. For the last 12 years, we've been celebrating with champagne. And now we are a country that's joining the Alcoholic Anonymous. And we have no idea where we are with the integration process. If you ask me now, will Albania join the EU tomorrow? I have no idea. And nobody has an idea because nobody addresses corruption. And let me give you, I didn't want to use an EU illustration, but because we don't have US representatives here, so I might as well use that occasion. In February, Anthony Blinken visited our country and he said amazing words for our government. Great leadership. Wow, wow, bravo. The next few weeks later, the US State Department published its report and said Albania is one of the has big problem with corruption. Now, what's the message there? What is the message for civil society? What is the message for academics? What's the message for the people? Now, the Secretary of State says we are great. Yet the State Department says, no, we are not great. The same things happen with EU. I told Susanna, I met a professor from Georgia, and she was so happy. Yes, we are candidates for EU, and so on. We're so thrilled. Soon we'll join EU. I said, hold on, darling. How old are you? She said, I'm 32. I said, maybe in your lifetime you might join EU. It's a long process. They all say, well, well done. Albania, good. Montenegro, good. North Macedonia, good. Change the name and you'll be good. They changed the name and they still are not good. Okay? So please, guys, transmit this message. Address corruption. Strengthen democracy. Democracy, it is the safeguard of security. But why we have reasons of concern? Because these countries, I'm using Albania this time, we were cyber attacked 3 years ago by Iranian certain forces. I was advisor to the president of Albania at the time, and all my wages and my personal emails and official emails were made public. Not only mine, every high official in Albania, their emails, their bank accounts, whatever, they were public. A week later, all the secret agents of Albania, it was disclosed, it was public. And then I was surprised to check that two of my friends were agents. And then I thought, that's why they come to my office very often, right? But why? Because countries without democracy are the weakest link. We are a NATO member country. We are spying for you. You will be in trouble if small countries, corrupt countries, will have lack of security. So be careful. World War I did not begin in Paris, did not begin in London, began in a place, Sarajevo. Where is that? I have no idea. Or it's somewhere in the world. Then we know what happened. Okay, situation in Kosovo. It's very dire. It might come from there. Be careful, guys. That's why we have to strengthen, because these 4 minutes, no more politicians. They think for the next elections. And I'm surprised with Macron, I'm surprised with the Greek foreign minister to build an iron dome against whom? Not Russia, against Turkey. Is that a message of peace going on, or is it for public opinion for the next elections? This is not a rhetoric of peace what's going on. Irresponsible. We need statesmen who think for the next generations to preserve the peace, not for the upcoming elections of EU officials. Use EU for promotion, come back, become prime minister of the country, then apply again for extended mandate and so on for just to stay in power. We need statesmen because war is not a game. After I had some discussion with a few nice gentlemen there and we're talking about experiences of war. The first picture is during communism. I come from a country, until 17, I was under communism, and I've seen hanged people, and I've seen torture and everything. The other one is in 1997, when I was only 20 years old, in the peak of my youth. And these guys here, they were just the selfies of the day. Like, you take selfies? That was the selfies of 1997. I woke up one morning, and I didn't know, and I still don't know, why we went through that. And 2 years later, I volunteered with the Kosovo crisis. I didn't want to use pictures, so I used a painting of mine, which I painted in 1999, when I was 22 years. This is a very big, large painting, and it's called The Bet. It happened in Bosnia and Kosovo. 3-4 soldiers saw a pregnant woman, Kosovar woman, and they bet, is it a boy or a girl? Let's open her tummy up and let's see. I exhibited this painting in England and the British were very shocked. Oh, bloody scene, what's this? but they were alarmed. This is the terror of war. It's not a nice thing. Don't take it for granted. Please don't take it for granted. We need mature leadership. And remember, it's not a gift. You are not being given that the day of your birth and then you inherit it until the end of your life. You have to fight for it. You have to work hard. You have to be vigilant and you have to invest. We all have to be careful. If we sleep today, if we are not cautious today, tomorrow we'll wake up in dictatorship and in war. And my last message to you, please, especially for the young people and the young researchers, be the knights of peace. Prepare yourself and be vigilant all the time. And please remember, everyone, we were being given two hands for a reason. A reason. One for ourselves and one for the others. One to defend ourselves and one to fight. But the best part of all, we can play piano and guitar and play music. And we can live in accord with each other. In music, you know, those who play music know, an accord is made of at least 2 or 3 notes. That even though they are do, re, mi, fa, sol, or whatever, together they make a beautiful sound. So let's use this gift. Let's promote peace. But to preserve peace is democracy. Thank you very much. And everything.
Thank you very much, Bleder. It was the point of war and democracy is a huge question. Always a huge question here, Susanna. Ne? So, we now arrived to the last speech of Matteo Fulgenzi, which is a contractist in our university, University of Salento. Matteo will discuss the issue of global diplomacy in pursuit of Sustainable Development Goal 16 for world peace and security. Please, Matteo.
So, first of all, I want to thank the organizers, Professors Susanna Cafaro, Claudia Morini, Saverio De Benedetto, for this opportunity. It's for me a great pleasure and an honor to be here. And thanks to all the people involved in the organization of this event. Thank you all for being here, listening. So let's talk about global diplomacy. The preamble of the United Nations Charter states the commitment of all the peoples of the world to save succeeding generation from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in human rights, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. To this end, it pledges the determination to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. Of course, like any other international treaty, the UN Charter talks mainly to states. Anyway, those who draft these words were not the first to promote a vision of one world in which all humans are neighbors, speaking of the family of mankind. As noted already in the 90s by the Commission on Global Governance, governance is the sum of the many ways individuals and institutions, public and private, manage their common affairs. In its renowned report presented in 1995 to the UN Secretary General and to the UN General Assembly, the Commission underlined that in the past governance and law used to be matters of almost entirely national concern. However, as at the national level, so in the global neighborhood, effective governance requires democratic and accountable institutions and the rule of law. In this regard, democratic governance must function in a bottom-up sense, strengthening the link between legitimacy and effectiveness. Institutions without territorial roots are rarely effective in the long term. In some key fields, state sovereignty must be exercised at the level of local communities, especially in the light of pressing humanitarian concerns, often source of conflicts, and the need to protect the environment and climate. The growing significance of subnational authorities in realizing the UN's Sustainable Development Goals mirrors the escalating complexity of national and global challenges. Evidence underscore the pivotal role played by subnational governments in fostering initiatives pertaining to climate change mitigation, as well in pandemic management amidst the COVID-19 crisis, along with their unique capabilities in addressing social and economic vulnerabilities where conflicts and instability can take root. Against this backdrop, the UN Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development serves as a guiding framework empowering subnational administrations toward the attainment of inclusive and sustainable territorial development goals. Moreover, this paradigm puts emphasis on the inclusions and valorization of marginalized population, epitomized by the principle "leave no one behind." In their implementation of the SDGs, local and regional authorities frequently insist on fostering strategic partnerships across different sectors and tiers of both national and supranational governance. The orientation towards multi-level approach of governance, decentralized collaboration, and active engagement of multiple stakeholders proves the commitment of subnational governments to accountability, responsiveness, peer learning, review mechanism, dissemination, and coherence within the implementation context of the SDGs. Also, from an effective cross-border perspective, the cultivation of such horizontal and heterogeneous partnerships hold the core potential to offset knowledge asymmetries, fortify institutional capacities, and galvanize resource mobilization, even circumventing national systemic resistance. Within this framework, the EU Treaty of Lisbon stands as a silent model for innovative and democratic global governance, where global and local levels can be functionally synthesized in a global approach. In the axiological prism traced by the preamble of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, as well by the Article 4.2 of the Treaty of the European Union, of Article 3.3 Clause 3, and Article 5, always of the Treaty of the European Union, the EU fully embraces the principle of subsidiarities enshrined in Article 5.1 and 3 of the Treaty of the European Union, as well as the principle of proximity referred to in Article 10.3 of the same treaty, which also reaffirms, together with paragraph 2, the principle of participatory and representative democracy. Consistently, Article 300.3 and following articles define the mandate of the Committee of the Regions, requiring that members of this additional consultative body hold an official electoral mandate within or to be politically accountable to an elected subnational assembly. Moreover, this programmatic outline coherently pervades the entire regulatory structure of the EU, also taking shape in the allocation of the European Regional Development Fund, in the Interreg programming for EU funds, open also to partners from outside the EU, and lastly, in the leading role attributed to subnational bodies in the implementation of the national recovery and resilience plans funded through the Next Generation EU and the Repower Europe chapters. The synergistic relationships among the different SDGs, and in particular among the 11th Sustainable Cities and Communities, the number 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, and the number 17, Partnership for Goals, underscore their relevance in delineating concerted actions towards the attainment of peace, justice, and the fortification of robust multi-level institutions. SDG 16 embodies a dual role as both as a consequential outcome and a catalyst for local sustainable development. Its overarching aims pivot around the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies, ensuring universal access to justice and fostering the establishment of effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions across all tiers of governance within the scope of the holistic realization of the 2030 Agenda. The nexus between peace and sustainable development finds further confirmation in the UN Agenda's assertion that development progresses hand in hand with peace and security, as emphasized by the UN Security Council Resolution number 2282 of 2016, under which the responsibility for sustaining peace and security worldwide is broadly shared by national governments and all other national stakeholders, thus improving the capacities of national subnational institutions, particularly in human rights protection and economic facilitations, emerges as a linchpin for crisis management and plays a pivotal role in conflict prevention, as well as in the post-conflict reconstruction process, by addressing root causes of conflict linked to social, economic, and land inequality through a reality-based institutional approach. One of the fundamental reasons for the failure of the world community to prevent conflicts and security issues is the reluctance or inability of governments to respond to crises, especially of a purely domestic nature, opting instead for procrastination, to conserve resources, or to avoid difficult and unpopular decisions about necessary solutions. It therefore appears clear that some issues are better addressed at the regional rather than national or even global level, even if still in coordination with higher levels of governance. As it happens, for example, with the localized effect of pollutions or other natural or human phenomena, as well as for the practical adoption of new conducts useful for preserving the environment and combating the climate crisis. Looking more specifically at the most critical situations around the world, even close to civil conflict, a regional and interregional economic approach can also contribute to overcoming historical enmities through the development of closer economic and political ties, the creation of economies of scale, the development of common infrastructures, and the testing of new methods to deepen integration as the first building bricks on which to build solid progress at the global level. Of course, here BRICS is in the sense of the blocks, not in the sense of the international forum. As noted, the concept of subsidiarity adopted in Europe provides a framework for distributing responsibilities among global, national, regional, and local governance institutions in an efficient manner, configuring the centrality of regionalism and the rise of an informal multilateralism as a path to peace and sustainable development in the framework of the complementary declination of the concept of security in the meaning of proximity. All this in the broader concept of people-to-people diplomacy understood as intentional, political, and cross-border interactions based on communication between groups of people for public rather than private interests, and promoting interests that they have in common or aim to have foreign policy implications. Where people-to-people initiatives have to have political influence through bottom-up initiatives that can challenge governments' top-down policies by engaging and communicating with people at a transnational level, as in the model of transnational advocacy networks through which civilians aim to indirectly influence government policies. In this context, a renewed concept of city diplomacy, as per recommendation 234 of 2008 of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe, always in accordance with Article 10 of the European Charter of Local Self-Governments. So this renewed concept of city diplomacy has evolved to encompass various forms of intrastate and interstate engagement and cooperation between local and regional authorities, with a growing emphasis on their local role in peace-building efforts. Of course, this may raise pertinent questions regarding the traditional concept of diplomacy as an exclusive attribute of nation-states, as well about the rationale behind local and regional governments' commitment in peace-building endeavors, their capacity to undertake such initiatives, and the geographical scope of their involvement. However, the innovative concept of local diplomacy underscores the contribution of local and regional authorities to conflict prevention, peace buildings, and post-conflict reconstruction, both within and outside conflict-affected region and at cross-border level, as direct interlocutors of the bodies of the international organization to which the states they belong have joined, such as in first place the UN, but also the EU. So, furthermore, the necessary roles played by local politicians, organization of the civil society, citizens' assemblies, journalists and academia cannot be underestimated for the coherent SDG 16 implementation and in the perspective of the broader realization of the Agenda 2030. Global diplomacy can effectively connect all the multi-level actors, helping to circumvent many of the bureaucratic mechanisms and systemic interference that persist at the national central level by fostering local-to-local and region-to-region learning and collaboration for democracy, sustainability, and resilience, thus facilitating an inclusive multilateralism. In conclusion, the Team Europe cooperation approach established between the European Union, the UN, the EU member states, as well the European Investment Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, could certainly prove to be a decisive vector in this direction. It has already emerged as the backbone of the neighborhood, the term that we cited at the beginning of this intervention, development, and international cooperation instrument named Global Europe, the main financial instrument of the EU international cooperation from 2021 to 2027, and its programming, consistently with the purposes expressed in the preamble and the provision of Article 3.1 of the Treaty of the European Union with regard to peace as a fundamental value of the European Union. So by focusing its resources on the subnational level of governance, the Global Europe Plan could even more effectively support these developed countries in overcoming development challenges in coordination with the structures of the UN Sustainable Development Group and all the UN entities, funds, and programs, included the Loss and Damage Fund agreed recently at the COP28, significantly contributing to the achievement of the agenda's international commitments with its 17 SDGs and also the Paris Agreement. So thank you for listening, for your attention.
Thank you, Matteo. Now we complete the panel of speeches, and unfortunately is quite 1 o'clock, so we need to go to the keynote concluding speech. So, Susanna, please. So maybe you may say some words on this keynote speech.
I am very happy to introduce the next and final contribution to this event, which is the honor guest, Monica Frassoni, who unfortunately couldn't be with us because of family reasons, but I know she's very much in spirit with us. And so thank you, Monica, for being here, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, sure.
Okay, because my video is not that fantastic. So first of all, I would like most of you did, I could listen, I could follow some of the interventions, but not all of them. Susanna and her team for this great event, because I believe that probably in this time, more than 6 years ago, when this event started, we probably need to take into account for the first time from this side of the continent the impact of war, and this is certainly something that obliges us to go back to this very old, not very old, rather old say of George Santayana, who said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And in some cases, in these moments, I don't know about you, but I do feel very much like that, that we are somehow repeating mistakes that could be avoided, and in a situation in which we have many more instruments to actually avoid them. And therefore, the whole conversation about supranational democracy, institutions, democracy, sheer democracy, I mean, what does it mean? How it can be organized at the supranational level is certainly something that is absolutely key, exactly because today we are in a moment in which there is a constant delegitimation of supranational democracy, which already started some time ago, supranational institutions as well. They serve no purpose, they are completely useless, they are probably not functioning well, it's not realistic enough, etc. This is a constant delegitimation, which has a big effect on the way in which they function and in which they are considered. And from the other side, we are in a situation in which the political conversation is so polarized that all those voices of reason are considered to be less effective and less realistic. So to find a moment and a situation in which professionals from legal knowledge, I mean, of jurists, but also activists, politicians, and all other kinds of experts, or not even experts, you know, other kind of interested people can come together and work and discuss. It's by itself an absolute value. I would like to deal with a couple of elements that come, of course, from my experience. I know Susanna for a very long time. Parliament and became a member of the European Parliament and then president of the European Green Party. And after that, I created with a bunch of companies and think tanks a lobby organization called the European Alliance to Save Energy, which I have the honor of chairing today. And also I am chairing another organization which is dealing with electoral systems in third world countries or in developing countries. Why do I say this? Because this kind of experience is helping me very much in lending you a couple of thoughts, also taking stock from what I heard. And I must admit that some of the interventions I heard were very strong and very inspirational. And I also want to thank you for this. So the first step, as I said, is to understand what is going on and why it was so easy or relatively easy to come back to a situation in which war is the talk of the day, is certainly, as I said earlier, the delegitimation of the supranational institutions and also the delegitimation of dialogue as an instrument not only of diplomacy, but also of politics and of reaching results through it. I believe that this is an element that is not there only at the international level, but is there at all levels, even the level of your condominium. In the moment in which you have to set up a discussion or find an agreement on something, the most extreme seem to take the day. And this is something that is there in the moment in which you look at elections, for example, or you look at the people who actually made a political career. And this is also a second element I would like to underline. So the delegitimation of supranational institution and institution as such, the question of how it is possible and positively seen the capacity of bringing about a compromise and an agreement, and the impact that this has on democracy, which is on the way in which people who are governing or leaders are actually chosen. And we have been speaking a lot about the concept of democracy. And I think that today, and somebody of you, I think, discussed about the way in which we have to renew this concept of democracy and what do we need in order to make it more effective, because this is the topic. Both, as I said, basically at all levels, because the interesting thing is that the same kind of logic that are actually working at grassroots are also working at the higher institutional level. And I want to repeat it, at the level of the choice, which are elections. So I think that the issue of democracy today has been very much interpreted, and this is certainly the case in Italy, but also in other states, as the law of the majority, which means that whenever you have a majority, you basically are allowed to do whatever you like. And in a situation in which it is a very big polarization and in which people have very little memory, as somebody said also during these 2 days, this is a sort of an explosive combination. And I believe that one of the key problems that we have in our democracy today is that people vaguely understand that it is no more the case that the best are the ones who are actually going to be elected, or the best are the ones who are actually going to have a say. When I say the best, I mean not only the more expert, but also those who are able to create an empathy and who are able to ensure a large participation of people. And here I would like also to say something. At European level, but not only at European level, there has been a very big, once again, delegitimation of expertise. Very often, the Commission is accused to be too bureaucratic. Very often, there is a lack of understanding that the administration should be competent, that there is a situation in which we basically take for granted certain things. And this is very much linked to the fact that being an expert and being somebody who is able to have an effective governance is not exactly the same. And so a very important part of democracy, which according to me has been a little bit downsized or at least underestimated, is the relation between the capacity of having an expertise and an effectiveness, the capacity of having empathy, and the capacity of making people feel that they are participating. And I believe that this is the core question of one of the most important problems of democracy, and that is of not being considered as effective and not being considered as something that is good for me. And this has to do, as I was saying earlier, also with the capacity of organization, the capacity of having a good administration, the capacity of being effective, but the capacity also of being empathic and of letting people participate. And I would like to make a couple of examples at this stage. The first has to do with environment and climate. I heard that during this morning you were talking about climate justice and the capacity of the judges to intervene directly and having an impact in making governments work, making governments move as far as climate change is concerned. Little parentheses, climate change is not a technical issue, although you need a lot of expertise and of knowledge and also memory to deal with it. It is also a question of democracy, because unless you get people behind you, you are not going to be able to deal with it properly and to have the necessary support to do it. And also, it is a question of empathy, once again, between you, your people, your government, nature, the system where you are living. So climate justice is not the solution. It is one possibility of finding, if not solution, at least ways to deal with an issue that goes down very badly in terms of powerful people, of governments in general, but also of economic and political and social interests that are very powerfully able to determine decision-making at all levels. So I would like to make a comparison between what happened in Italy and what is happening around the world, and in particular what happened with the Swiss signorine that you mentioned. I think that was mentioned today. Well, the first thing is that in Italy there was a similar case brought to the one in the Netherlands, in France, and in Germany. There are some differences, but now we don't deal with it or with the details. And what happened was that at the end of a very cumbersome process, which, by the way, is not completely finished because we are at the first level, at the first appeal, the judge said, I am not competent to deal with this issue. I am not competent to deal with this issue because climate policies are the resort of politics, of government, and therefore it is not possible for me to intervene, to condemn, or also to consider acceptable an appeal which is done on the basis of the damage that is provoked to people. And this is something that, according to me, is a very big signal of how much, at least in this country, which is one of those which is governed by people who basically do not accept or don't consider climate change particularly important, is very much linked to the cultural approach and to the capacity of making of climate a democratic point, a democratic endeavor, and also something that is very largely perceived as a common challenge. Those judges, differently from the judges that were working in a completely different environment, like in France, Germany, or the Netherlands, considered that their role in dealing with something like this was absolutely not relevant because laws and policy making were the ones who could decide whether or not we would have climate policies. And this is, according to me, something that should be taken very much into account. Of course, there will be other appeals, but we have to take into consideration the question that institutions, being the legal, judicial, laws, etc., are absolutely not enough, not only to describe what a democratic system is, but also how a judicial system can work and can be effective. I would like now to touch on two last points. The first is that if everything that I said made some kind of sense, I hope it does, because if you are from outside, it's difficult to understand and to perceive if people understand what they say, what you are saying, and above all, listen. I mean, the quality of what comes to you is good enough to make you understand. But the first conclusion I wanted to take from this, is that I completely agree with the previous speaker who said that there is no security with democracy, but I would say that you will not be able to have a democratic system that is working unless you have a better understanding from people of what their role in democracy is. In the sense that one of the major problems that we have with all these right-wing people winning elections is that the value of democracy in terms of you taking in charge your future, be it because you buy, solar roofs, or because you go with your neighbor to collect the waste, or because you want to participate to an assembly of citizens, whatever, but you as a citizen have a role. Whereas those parties that are today in a majority, at least in Italy, but also in other countries, and who are on the winning side, are actually giving people the idea, do not worry, I will take care of you. Do not worry, you don't need to participate. Do not worry, I'll do it. And this is from where, I believe, a lot of troubles come, like the threats to freedom of expression, the threats to the freedom of demonstrate, etc., etc., etc. So I believe that this is an element that is above all, but I wouldn't say only, let's say also at European and supranational level, is absolutely key. The fact that the Conference on the Future of Europe was able to put together very interesting proposals, but then was basically let go, notably by the governments, but also by the Commission and much less by the Parliament, was such a blow for the sum of the people who participated that definitely we need to take into account how important, how key the continuous providing of structure of participation, but also of a culture of participation is key at all levels if we want to keep a working democracy, and if we want to be secure, and if we want to have an effective, not only climate change, but also industrial and economic policy, as well as an understanding that there is a slight difference, and this will be my last message, between security, defense, and rearmament. Because I believe that this is also another element in which we really absolutely need working supranational institutions, and we need to reconquer the trust of citizens, but also of governments, that you can deal with conflict through dialogue at all levels, through compromise also at all levels, and through institutions. You don't need to run to rearm yourself, because this does not mean that you will be more safe. And I think that here we could go into many details, which I will not go. But for me, the issue of the European defense, for example, is very much It's very dangerous because it is at the moment totally de-linked, I mean, totally separated from the institutions of the common foreign security policy, from the role of the European Parliament, from diplomacy, actually. We are talking about how we are going to have in the next commission a commissioner on defense, which is not a commissioner on defense, it's a commissioner on industry of defense, which is a armed industry. And I think that here we have to be very rigorous, also those of you who are academics, to bring back the idea that there is a difference between a European defense with the European army. Very little among us talk about European. A European common foreign security policy, which must be linked to a federal system, or at least to a system that much more than today is based on the work of the parliament and on participation of people. So I think that in order to be able to deal with our world in a way, we have to rediscover old concepts. We have to involve many more people, probably for the next edition. We will have probably to invite also some business people that we probably able to give another view of another approach to this important topic. I will close here. Thank you very much. I was very sorry not to be able to come to the 6th edition. I hope that I will be able to be there with you next year. And I hope that it was also not too long and too difficult to listen to these few messages. Thank you. Grazie.
Thank you to Monica Frassoni for this excellent keynote concluding speech. It remains just to thank all the panelists and to give the floor to Susanna for terminating the 6th Supranational Democracy Dialogue. Please, Susanna.
Thank you, Saverio. And first of all, thank you all. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Monica, for the final remarks. I think it's clear to all of us here that Supranational Democracy Dialogue, it's a place as well as a platform, as well as a community, growing year after year. And the other side of it is active citizenship, because supranational democracy could look like something very much in the hyper-Eurasian, but there is the other side. This is about citizens take up responsibility for their lives as local, national, and global citizens. And so I think that we are all growing together in this, and I look forward to see this community grow and flourish. And thank you all really for the contribution that you all gave to this flourishing of the project. Thank you. I'm sorry we won't have time for discussion on the contributions of the morning, so we will do this during the lunch for those willing. And after lunch, we will have a nice walk for those who want to continue to conversate and to have a look around Brindisi. Thank you.